I'm going to give Paul a bit of a hard time. I'm going to be moving around. And he's got a joystick there and he's got to switch between cameras. You'll be okay, Paul? All right. Pastor Vadim gave me a call on Thursday and he said, John, do you have a free Sabbath? And I said, I happen to have a free Sabbath. I was going to come and enjoy and sit down and relax and listen to you preach. And unfortunately, Pastor Vadim had to go to Sydney. And so you have me. So I'm sorry for you guys. It's good to hear that the adventurers are off. Was that Rally Day? Is it Rally Day? Yeah, when Graham and I were in Pathfinders, every time we had a program together, we went off, half the church just emptied every single time. That's a healthy thing. That's healthy when half the church empties because it shows that so much of the church is involved in other ministries as well. So good on the church for being involved in Pathfinders and Adventurers. Really, really great. Let me start by asking you a question. What is church for? Why do you come here? Why are we here? And I know there's many different reasons that we all have, but maybe just put your hand up or just call out why you come to church. Just for different reasons. To worship together. Yeah. Anyone else? Why you come to church? Fellowship. Yeah. To meet fellow believers. Yeah. Anything else? Why you come to church? Yes. To pray? Yes. And we did a lot of praying today. Beautiful. Yes. Yep. To come together, to pray for His name. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Anyone else? Danny? To learn? Yes, to learn. Anyway, yes. To be fed spiritual food. No one comes for worship to sing? I thought someone would pick up on that. My wife, she loves that. When she comes to church, she is uplifted spiritually by music. You know, different people are uplifted and connect with God in different ways. Some through Bible study, some through worship, some through fellowship, some through music. So we all come here because we're all wired in a different way, so we all need different things. Let me tell you a story. Is the title up there? No. Sometimes when I preach at a church, they put the title up there. Today's title is The Preacher's Wife. And you're thinking, what is that? What is that? Sounds like a strange title. Why talk about the preacher's wife? What has she done? It was a story of a pastor, a preacher. You may have read this in one of the publications, or maybe you've read this somewhere. I'm pretty sure some of you may have read this, and you may be aware of this story. But there was a pastor, middle-aged, very experienced. This is the kind of pastor that you want in your church. This is the kind of preacher that people listen to. You know, the kind of pastor that once he joins the church and you get to know him, you never want this pastor to leave. You know, there are some pastors that you think, okay, thanks, 2, 3, 4 years, and we need somebody new. Wherever this pastor goes, they just want to keep him. His preaching is fantastic. He loves the community. The community loves him. He has empathy. His sermons are just incredible. This is the kind of pastor that he was. And if you know who I'm talking about, just keep it to yourself. Right? You may have read the article on this particular pastor. He's the kind of pastor that also gets involved in the community very, very strongly. He loves the homeless. He loves those on the street. He feeds the people. He connects with them. He's just all around great pastor, great preacher. One day, as he's working on the streets, he's there meeting some of the drug addicts and the the women off the streets. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah? I've got to be careful because there's kids here, so I'm just trying to be careful of the wording that I'm using. He meets a young lady, and this young lady is one of these ladies off the street, and they connect. They share and they talk, and time goes past, and the pastor falls in love with this young lady, and they strike up a relationship, and so they start courting. Well, of course, this gets back to the leadership and the church, and the leadership of the church and the church is very concerned about this. You know, what will this do to the reputation of the pastor and so on? Just by the way, how would you feel about that if your pastor, a single man, was connecting with someone like that and he fell in love with this lady and it was time for him to bring her to church? How would you connect with that? How would you relate to that? Any concerns? What about his reputation? Would you be worried about his reputation? No? What about being unequally yoked? No? There's a few principles here that I think we need to consider. And so, fair enough, you know, you've got to be careful. But I think it's safe when you have a mature person, a mature Christian, and connecting with someone like this, I think they already understand the risks. You know, when you're young, I don't think that's something you want to encourage young people to connect with. But I think when you're older and you're mature and you're a Christian with values, I don't know. I'm not sure. But anyway, so they fell in love. He brought her to church, and the pastor sensed the tension in the church. There was some tension there. People were concerned. What do you do in these circumstances? Now, of course, the elders, they probably scratched their heads and thinking, you know, this could be a very sensitive situation. One of the elders might have had a daughter, just finished university. I'm sure she was great on the piano and organ, because every good pastor needs a wife who plays the organ or the piano. Am I right? Yeah, I know. I remember in my early 20s, I said to my wife, love, you know, what do you think if I become a pastor? And she goes, oh, John, no. I said, why, love? Why? Because then I have to learn how to play the piano. And she did not want to learn to play the piano. So that was the end of that career. So he sensed the tension in the church. And so the pastor decided to preach on a topic that he hoped would dispel the tension. And so he preached on a few different topics. And just quickly, let's go through a couple of verses. Open your Bibles. And we're just going to zip through 2, 3, maybe 4 verses on some of the things that he presented. First one was 1 John 4:7. Just quickly, 1 John 4:7, where it says here, Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. And everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. And the one who does not love does know not God, for God is love. Okay, that was one Sabbath. He preached on that theme. Then the next week he preached on another one, 1 Peter 4:8. And he continued to do this week after week. 1 Peter 4:8. As you're flicking through that. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Colossians 3:14. Colossians 3:14. You know, it's beautiful when I look, especially the young people, using their holy devices, their holy screens. You know what's beautiful about these screens is that today, I'm not sure about Google, maybe those with Android phones can tell me, but iPhone has a thing that you can set up your phone in such a way that you can hide certain apps, you can hide certain messages. So really, you can create a Sabbath mode for your phone. So Sabbath morning, you wake up, and the only thing on your screen is your Bible. All the other apps, all your social media stuff, your emails, everything. Did you know you can do that? So you can be a good Christian and have a Sabbath mode on your phone. Colossians 3:14. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And of course, the one you know from 1 Corinthians 13:13. So now faith, hope, and love abide. These three, but of course the greatest of these is love. Well, the church relaxed, they settled down, they realized what the pastor was trying to teach them. The young lady became his fiancée. She got baptized. They bought a house. They got married. And life went on. She was accepted into the church. Little by little, the clothes that she used to own, the street clothes, slowly was sold off. The piercings and the earrings slowly came off. She couldn't do much about the tattoos. They just happened to be there. But she was beautifully integrated into the church community. What a beautiful story, yeah? Beautiful story. The pastor goes off and he does his evangelistic programs, as all good pastors do. Pastor Vadim, he's in Sydney this weekend. He's off. And sometimes this pastor goes off and he does his evangelistic programs. And sometimes he's gone for weeks and sometimes months at a time. And as he was away, the wife would go down to the shops and she would run the home and she would do what she needed to do. And one day she was there on the streets, sort of past where she used to work. And I don't know if it was the same, the smells or the sights or the people or whatever it was, but something triggered in her memory, the endorphins or whatever it was, and she fell into sin because a lot of time had gone past. And unfortunately, she got pregnant, and it wasn't the pastor's child. Now, of course, this caused incredible pain for the pastor and for the community. What do you do in this situation? What do you do when someone backslides like that? Now, of course, I know in the church many would say, well, we told you so. We told you being unequally yoked is dangerous. We told you so that this will cause a problem for your reputation. What do you do as a church in a situation like this? Can I ask, what would you do? What would you do? It's a tough one, isn't it? So you wouldn't judge, yeah? How would you treat her, if I can ask you directly? You would treat her the same as Christ. You would continue to love her? Interesting. Anyone else? I think that sums it up. It's really interesting because not all would treat people in that same way. I've been fortunate enough. The last month, I visited two churches, two of our sister churches, and when we shared some of these thoughts, not exactly these particular messages, but certain thoughts, it was interesting that these two particular churches that I visited were completely accepting and completely loving of those who were what we call sinners. But not all churches are like that. So it's beautiful when I hear something like that from you, sister. Very, very beautiful. But nevertheless, he sensed that there was tension in the church. And so he felt that he needed to preach about the topic of mercy and forgiveness. And you know what's beautiful about these texts that we shared, even those few texts that we shared this morning, is the texts on love are everywhere in the Bible. And the text on mercy and forgiveness is everywhere in the Bible. Let's just have a look at a few. Hebrews 8:12. And this one is special because this one actually comes from the Old Testament. When Paul quotes these texts, he's actually quoting texts in the same theme of several texts which are in the Old Testament. Hebrews 8:12. And so the preacher here, He preaches to his congregation and he says, "For I will be merciful to their iniquities, and I will remember their sins no more." Here is an example of God to show mercy and remember their sins no more. Hebrews 10:17, just a few pages over, or a few flicks on your holy screens. Hebrews 10:17, "And their sins and their lawless deeds I will remember no more." And last one here that we'll share, Jeremiah 33:8, something from the Old Testament. Jeremiah 33:8. "I will cleanse them from all their iniquity by which they have sinned against me, and I will pardon all their iniquities by which they have sinned against me, and by which they have transgressed against me." And the church embraces her, the church forgives her, and one of the reasons why the church does this is because they have a great example in the pastor. Because the pastor accepted her. The pastor forgave her. The pastor, whose wife it was, embraced her. What a great role model that is. Now, I want to be careful about this story because, again, I don't think this is something that we should consider the definitive role model for every man or every woman, because there is a place for divorce, and we'll talk about that in a little while. There is a place for that. But I don't know how, as mere mortals, I'm no preacher or pastor, but I don't know how we forgive and love in this way and how you do that, but he did. Occasionally you meet a person, a beautiful woman, a beautiful man, and you hear the stories of their abusive relationship that they're in, or the husband, he keeps cheating on his wife, and yet for some reason these people continue to accept them and love them and embrace them. I don't get that. I don't always understand that, but it happens. There are people, and sometimes that love has an impact on the other person's life. I'll share a little bit about that later on as well. But for whatever reason, time had moved on and the problems didn't get better, but they got worse. Because once again, as her child grew older, she found herself on the same street, in the same place, the same sounds, the same smells, and she fell into sin again, and she had another child that was not his. And again, the church now has to deal with what to do with this again. But it just didn't happen twice, it happened 3 times. 3 children that weren't his. And by now, you know the story I'm talking about. You know the pastor that I'm talking about. You know the big picture that I'm trying to talk about. And that's the story of Hosea. But it really is the story of Christ's love for the church. But back to the pastor. How do you deal with someone that continues to backslide like she did? How do we as a church continue to do? How do we deal with that? Someone who continues to backslide. What do we do about that? Continue to love? Continue to accept? At what point do you say enough is enough? Enough backsliding is enough backsliding. You are a bad example for our community and our church. Where do you draw the line? And maybe we can use God as our example. Where does God draw the line for us and our backsliding? Do you know one reason why people go back and do the sin over and over and over again, especially the same sin? Are there any psychologists here or counselors? Jenny? I don't know if your wife's... She's with the little one. Okay. Do you know one reason why people do the same sin over and over again? It's because, especially those of us who with religious background, one reason that we do something again is because we know that sin, at least unconsciously, needs to be punished. Yes, we know that God has forgiven us, that God covers a multitude of sins. But something in us also says, I need to be punished for this. And one convenient form to be punished for our sins is to do the sin again. Why? Because when we do the sin again, we feel bad. We feel worse. And feeling bad about ourselves is a convenient form of self-punishment. That's why we do it again. And so you find Hosea's wife goes back again and again and again, possibly because of how she feels about herself. But really, who are we talking about here? We're talking about Israel. Why did Israel continue to fail and fall and continue to go back again and again and again? But who are we really talking about? We're talking about us. We're talking about the church. This is a bigger picture. You know, there is an interesting chapter in Ezekiel chapter 16, and you can flick to it just quickly. I'm going to read a couple of sections from it. Now, Ezekiel chapter 16 talks about a prostitute. The prostitute happens to be Israel. And God is describing this woman in Ezekiel 16. Now, what is interesting is that the rabbis refused to read this chapter in their readings in the synagogues later on in the history of Judaism, because the chapter is just too strong. It's just a little bit too heavy. But I'm going to pick a couple of sections here. If you go to verse 49, and I think this really, I picked something safe out of this chapter. Verse 49 of chapter 16. Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. Notice that Sodom is referred to as the sister of, in this case, it's Jerusalem. Does that surprise you? Can you imagine if we were referred to as the sister of, I don't know, what would be the equivalent to Sodom for us, whatever that may be. But in this case, now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and the needy. Verse 50. They were haughty and did detestable things before me. Therefore I did away with them, as you have seen. Samaria did not commit half the sins that you did. You have done more detestable things than they, and have made your sisters seem righteous by all these things that you have done. And moving on a few more verses. Because your sins were more vile than theirs, they appear more righteous than you. So then, be ashamed, bear your disgrace, for you have made your sisters appear righteous. Isn't that amazing? That Sodom and Samaria, which were the example of evil and the object lesson of evil to Israel, seemed more righteous than Jerusalem did. And this was really, really astonishing at that time, which means that any hope or restoration or forgiveness that was given to Israel naturally had to pass to Sodom and Samaria. And when you read on in chapter 16, I'm going to let you read this at home. When you read on in chapter 16, especially near the end, and chapter 17, you see that this is exactly what God wanted. And He said, in the same way that I have forgiven you and I'm forgiving you, Israel, I am going to forgive Sodom and Samaria because I have to. If I'm going to forgive you, I have to forgive them. Yeah, the entire language here is explicit and talks about pride and self-sufficiency. But I won't go into all those details. Just a question. Why not divorce? Why not just simply divorce? Is there a place for divorce? Yeah, absolutely. There's absolutely a place for divorce. It's absolutely reasonable. I have a quote here from Taylor Griswold. She says, "You can have compassion for someone suffering and still hold them accountable for the harm that they caused and to the standard of respecting your boundaries. Their pain is not an excuse to inflict pain onto you." In other words, just because they're going through a difficult time, or they're doing something sinful, or they're causing difficulties in your marriage or in your life, is no excuse. And there is a point in all our lives that we can draw boundaries and we can say enough is enough, because there is something that's called self-respect and self-worth. And that's also important, that we have that self-respect and self-worth. And divorce is a way of preserving that. Now, God has his ideals. We know in the Bible that God hates divorce. And he says that in Hosea. He explicitly says that he hates divorce because he knows what it feels like to be divorced when it comes to Israel. And there is this ideal way that God thinks, but there is this real way that God also lives. He lives in this real world. You know, when the prostitute Mary was brought before Jesus and surrounded by her accusers, what was the ideal? What was the law? The ideal says that she needed to be executed, correct? That was the ideal. That's here, the ideal. But God lives in the real. And he does something that's even beyond the real. And he takes that person and he forgives them and he shows compassion and mercy because he knows that this life can be transformed. And was Mary's life transformed? And what did she become later on? A follower and a disciple. The power of transformation, the power of love. And so in Hosea 14:4, God says that I will heal their backsliding. I will love them freely, for my anger has turned away. And when you are loved freely, when you are loved for your backsliding and for your hurt, sometimes, and this is what we read in Ezekiel chapter 16, it causes shame. And when shame happens in our lives, that can be the start of healing. But unfortunately, the story doesn't end there, because Hosea's wife, Gomer, probably went through this shame. She went through this struggle, and she ended up again in the same place, but now it went even worse, and she ended up a slave and owned by someone, and she was taken off to a far country somewhere in the Middle East. And so what does Hosea do? Hosea takes this house that they had, he takes his possessions, he sells everything he has, he finds out what the value is, he negotiates the price, takes everything he's got, sells it, travels to the far land, finds her, and then when he finds her, there she is, a broken in her heart, broken spiritually, broken physically, but he pays for her, he puts new clothing on her, he embraces her, he shows her love, he shows her compassion, he shows her forgiveness, and he says, honey, I love you, come home. I've paid the price. I've done everything I can to buy you back. You don't have to worry about this anymore. Come home. And she does. And what happened to Gomer? When she came home, what kind of a wife was she? She loved him. The spirit was, in a sense, that nature she had, that life that she was grown up in on the streets was broken. And she became a faithful wife. And this is the story of Jesus. This is the story of Israel. Israel takes this broken community, this broken bride out of Egypt in their suffering, in their distress, in their complete brokenness. He takes them out, baptizes them through the waters of the Red Sea, builds a house in the middle of the desert, a sanctuary where he lives with them. He says in Ezekiel 16, Verse 53, yet I will remember the covenant I made with you in the days of your youth, and I will establish an everlasting covenant with you. Then when I make atonement for you, for all you have done, you'll remember and be ashamed and never again open your mouth because of your humiliation, declares the sovereign Lord. I am sure that Gomer never expected her husband to come and sell everything and find her. I am sure that many of us, or Israel, never expected God to save them the way that he did. I am sure that heaven did not expect Jesus to do what he did for this broken world. They would have never anticipated or expected Jesus to come, to suffer, and to die. It was a mystery for them. It was an absolute mystery. And that is the power of love. Israel's departure from God had come because they had failed to remember who they were in relationship to him. But as a result of his atoning work, they would remember and return in humility and gratitude, just like Gomer did. The grace of God always is available to those who repent. God will remove the guilt of sin and will heal, forgive, and save people and nations. This is one of the stories that I love in the New Testament that Jesus gives, is the story of the prodigal son. And I love this one scene. I'm just going to focus on this one little scene. When the son decides to come home, you know, he's in his rags. He's got the stuff all over him from the pigsty, you know, the mud and all the stuff that he was just there. He's got no shoes. He's barefoot. His hair is all matted. He's gaunt because he hasn't eaten very well. And he's traveling up the street, and the father sees him from a far distance. And when the father sees him, and this is what I love, this is why every story in the Bible shows us the beauty of God's character and his love for us. When he sees his son come back, the father does what? Does he stand there and wait for his son to come? What does he do? He runs to his son. And when he sees his son, he embraces him and he hugs him and he kisses him. And guess what? The son hasn't said a word yet. The father has accepted him just as he was in his filth. And it is only then that the son says, Father, I've come home. Just accept me as one of your servants. And of course, the father will have nothing. He doesn't want to hear about that. He says, we're going to celebrate. We're going to put a robe over you. We're going to put a new one. We're going to get you cleaned up. We're going to give you shoes on your feet, a ring on your finger. My son is back. I love that image of God and how he treats us, how he loves us. It's a story of mercy, of forgiveness. It's a story of restoration. It is the Christian story, and it is unique. This is a story that no other faith, no other religion has. This is a unique narrative that we as Christians have. And we as Adventists are even more privileged because with our truths, with our beautiful, unique truths, and with this beautiful narrative, this Christian narrative, we are a unique people. We have much to offer. We have much to give to the world. Absolutely beautiful. I'm going to read this from the Message, Hosea 2:14. You can follow if you want, but it'll be a bit different in your Bibles. But I just love this Message version of it, where it says, and now, this is God speaking, and now here's what I'm going to do. This is a little bit American, okay, but you'll understand. And now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start all over again. I'm taking her back out into the wilderness. It's the imagery of Israel when he was with them. I'm taking her back into the wilderness where we had our first date, and I will court her. I will give her bouquet of roses. I'll turn Heartbreak Valley into acres of hope, and she'll respond as she did as a young girl, those days when she was fresh out of Egypt. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that a beautiful image of God and his love. Which brings me a little bit to Ephesians 5:25. Who knows what Ephesians 5:25 is? Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved. How come the ladies know this one? Husbands, love your wives as Christ loves the church. Let's have a quick read of that. And wives, do not give your husbands a hard time on the way home in the car, because your husbands will say, can you please read the first 2 or 3 verses before this one? Ephesians 5:25. And again, I'm reading this from the Message because I just love the way the Message has reframed this one. Husbands, go all out in your love for your wives. Do you like that? Exactly as Christ did for the church. A love marked by giving, not getting. Christ's love makes the church whole. His words evoke her beauty. Everything he does and says is designed to bring the best out of her, dressing her in dazzling white silk, radiant with holiness. And that is how husbands ought to love their wives. Wow. You know, when I was preparing this message, this text came to mind, and it had a whole new meaning to me. How do I love my wife the way Christ loves the church? How do I do that? The way Hosea loved Gomer, the way Christ loved Israel, the way he forgives, the way he has mercy, the way he wants to restore, wants to win her back. It's a tough call, men. It's a tough call. But one thing is great about this, that we have a great example in Christ. And as men or as future husbands, some youth here, some young people here, it gives us hope of what we can be. It gives us something to look forward to, this journey that we are all on. What place should a church be? What should this church be like? What should be our main thing that a church should be? I think a church should be the school of love. That here in this church, we need to learn to love. We need to learn to love each other. And here at Lakeside, we have a great advantage because we are so diverse. We have such a great diverse community that we are challenged often when it comes to loving us, because we have different people from different cultures, different backgrounds. We sometimes have different ideas, different theology. If we can learn to love here amongst ourselves, then maybe we can learn to love those just on the outside, maybe just outside the door. Maybe we can learn to love those with different Christian ideas, our Christian brothers and sisters in the community. Maybe we can learn to love those who don't even share the Christian faith, our Hindu, Sikh, Muslim, and so on friends. Maybe we can learn to love those who live on the streets like this pastor did, like Jesus did. He spent most of his time caring for those on the street, healing the poor, feeding them, looking after them. Maybe we can even learn to love those who want to do us harm and want to put us down and want to backstab us, those at work, at school, and other places. And that's a tough one. When we talk about this at home, Janine says to me, sometimes when we have worship in the evenings, and these themes come up, she goes, "Oh, John, I don't know about loving my enemies. I have a lot of people who I have a problem with." And if she was living there with the disciples, she says, "I'd be with them. Father, should I call fire from heaven and destroy them?" For sure. My beautiful wife. I love her genuine heart. I pray that we may learn to be others-centered. May our love extend further than the boundaries of this wall, for I think this is the true evidence of Christian maturity, that the love of God will dwell in us, not just in spirit, but also in truth, in both. So I pray that we as a church will learn to love, that this will be a place where we can feel comfortable and safe to do that, that we will be able to have those values, those important values that not only forgive, not only show mercy, not only have compassion, but the love that transforms people's lives. And that's what I pray for our church and our community. May God's love continue to transform you, and may it transform the people that we connect with every day. Amen.